Enough messing around with small samples and arbitrary cutoffs. It's time to slice through the qualifiers and anoint the greatest NBA defenders of all time. In decade-based rankings, I weighted peak and longevity relatively evenly. A guy could be a top 5 defender for a 10-year stretch with 3 or 4 elite seasons, even if he wasn't nearly as good for the majority of that span. But here, cracking the top 5 requires something more: a sustained peak. No flashes in the pan. No terrific 3-year runs followed, or less commonly preceded, by significantly less dominant play. This is a ranking of the absolute best, which means we don't have to choose between brilliant primes and long-lasting performance. Entry into this club requires both. We still have to consider eras to some extent, as the league didn't record blocks or steals until 1973 to 74. And there was no such thing as Defensive Player of the Year until 1982 to 83. All defensive teams showed up earlier, in 1968 to 69. We'll factor in awards, statistics, and impact on winning to determine which stoppers made the biggest difference. Let's D up. 15. David Robinson. The Admiral came into the league with the pedal to the metal. David Robinson was dominant early, averaging at least 3 blocks per game in each of his first 7 seasons. Robinson was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, the same year he led the league with 4.5 blocked shots per game and earned a spot on 8 all-defensive teams. 14. Rudy Gobert. The most decorated defender of this era, Rudy Gobert has won Defensive Player of the Year honors 3 times. The blocks leader in 2017, Gobert is a 6-time NBA All-Defensive First-Team recipient. The Stifle Tower remains an absolute force in the paint on defense. 13. Dwight Howard. A former number 1 overall draft pick, Dwight Howard had one of the most dominant defensive peaks ever. He won 3 straight Defensive Player of the Year awards, 2 block titles, and 5 rebounding titles from 2008 to 2013. Howard was the premier shot blocker of his era, and even though his prime was shorter than ideal, he still put together a nice 18-year career. 12. Gary Payton. Gary Payton was nicknamed the Glove because he defended his opponents very tight. Payton is one of 2 point guards to be named the Defensive Player of the Year, and he led the league in steals in 1996, his DPOY year. Payton was named to the NBA All-Defensive First Team 9 times. 11. Sidney Moncrief. Sidney Moncrief is the only guard to win the Defensive Player of the Year award more than once, 1983, 1984. Moncrief was the inaugural winner of that award, and he played an aggressive, in-your-face style of defense that was exhausting to go up against. He also earned all defensive honors throughout his career 5 times. 10. Kawhi Leonard. The Claw is one of the premier defensive stoppers of all time. While he has struggled with injuries as of late, when healthy, Kawhi Leonard can shut down any superstar in the league. Leonard won back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year awards in 2015 and 2016, and is a 7-time All-Defensive Team member. Leonard has ideal size for a wing defender, and is also one of the most instinctive defenders of all time. 9. Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett's NBA career was nothing short of iconic. Though he spent 12 seasons battling in Minnesota, where he made the playoffs 8 times but went past the first round only once, his defense was always at a very high level. After he was traded to Boston, his intensity and defensive efforts helped the team win their first NBA title since 1986, and their only championship in the preceding 34 years. He took the Defensive Player of the Year honors in the 2007 0-8 campaign for being the defensive leader and elevating the Boston Celtics' defensive game. Kevin Garnett led the league in rebounding 4 times and was named in the All-Defensive Teams on 10 occasions, 8 times in the first team. He is also one of only 2 players to be in the top 20 in both steals and blocks in NBA history, Hakeem Olajuwon being the other. 8. Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace was only 6 foot 9 inches, undersized for a center, but his off-the-charts motor made him one of the most intimidating defenders in the NBA. Wallace won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, which is tied for the most all-time. He was the blocks leader in 2002 and was an all-defense first-teamer 5 times. 7. Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen is probably the best perimeter defender the league's ever seen, a claim validated by his 8 all-defensive first-team honors and status as the only player to record at least 2,300 steals and 900 blocks in his career. Made famous for living inside Magic Johnson's jersey during the 1991 NBA Finals, the 6'8" inches forward had exceptional length, quickness, and intelligence. As we'll see, it's just difficult for a wing stopper to produce the stats and impact on winning a dominant big man can. 6. Michael Jordan. Though better known for his play on the other end, Michael Jordan was the DPOY in 1988 and the MVP, a feat duplicated by just one other player in NBA history, Hakeem Olajuwon in 1994, and made 9 all-defensive teams from 1988 to 1998. He led the league in steals 3 times and defensive box plus, minus twice, which isn't bad for a guy who shouldered, let's say, a significant scoring load. 5. Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman was more than willing to put his body on the line in order to make a play for his teammates. He constantly was diving for loose balls and was irritating to play against. The Worm was a 7-time All-Defense First-Team selection and 2-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. Rodman is arguably the greatest rebounder of all time as well. Rodman was the ultimate role player who didn't need touches on the offensive end, and it led him to 5 NBA Finals victories. 4. Dikembe Mutombo. Tied with Ben Wallace, Dikembe Mutombo also has 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. Mutombo would wag his fingers at opponents after blocking their shots, and he did that a lot, as he is second all-time in blocked shots with 3,289 rejections. 3. Bill Russell. Bill Russell's statistics won't pop off the page because a statistic like blocks wasn't invented until after his retirement. Still, Russell's efforts on the defensive end of the floor were way ahead of their time and directly contributed to his championship-filled career winning. He won 11 titles and was a 5-time MVP, despite only averaging 15.1 points per game for his career, largely in part to his team-first style of play and defensive presence. Russell ranks first all-time in defensive win shares at 133.6, which is 27.3 points higher than the next player on that list. 2. Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan is the greatest defender to never win a Defensive Player of the Year award, and quite frankly, it is a travesty that the big fundamental never won the highest honor on the defensive side of the ball. Still, he is second all-time in defensive win shares and was an 8-time all-defensive first-teamer. He added another 7 all-defense second teams to his resume as well. His 15 total all-defense selections are the most of all time, and he only didn't make an all-defensive team only 4 times in his career. 1. Hakeem Olajuwon. And then there was 1. Hakeem Olajuwon undoubtedly deserves the spot at the top of this list. He was a 9-time All-Defensive Player, Defensive Player of the Year, and a 2-time NBA champion. During his time in the NBA, Olajuwon scored 26,946, averaged 21.8 points per game, and blocked 3,830 shots. While there have been many spectacular defensive players throughout the history of the NBA, Hakeem Olajuwon stands proudly above the rest. He was truly one of a kind, and who knows if we will ever see another player with as much talent as he had.